Queensland's Central Highlands, an extensive area of elevated sandstone and basalt that has been eroded into a network of tablelands and mountain ranges, separated by some of the most spectacularly rugged country in the state. Here, between the Consuelo Tableland and the Great Dividing Range, lies Carnarvon Gorge, the area's most well-known feature. Join us for the next hour as we explore one of Australia's hidden treasures. G'day, I'm Ian Cleary.
And I'm Annie McCarthy.
As Carnarvon Wilderness Guides, we'd like to take you on a journey through a natural monument to the power of water and time. Behind us is Carnarvon Gorge, 35 kilometres long with high country rising 600 metres above the floor of the creek, and it forms one of Queensland's largest national parks.
And it's one of our favourite places in Australia.
In excess of 20,000 people make the trek to this isolated location each year, drawn by the gorge's oasis-like atmosphere, its majestic cliff lines with their secluded side gorges and the Aboriginal rock art. To stand on Bulimba Bluff looking south to the crest of the range is to be confronted by 200 million years of geological history, and to stand before the rock art sites of Cathedral Cave and the Art Gallery is to gaze upon evidence of a culture that spanned 3,500 years in the gorge, but exists here no longer. This is Bandana Airstrip, and we've organised a bit of aerial sightseeing with HeliQuest, who operate scenic flights over Carnarvon National Park, concentrating on the Mollyamba Gorge section. It's a great way to get a good feel for the country we're going to be crawling all over for the next couple of days, so hang on to your hats. Carnarvon Gorge is located around 600 kilometres northwest of Brisbane as the crow or helicopter flies. Although by road it's about a 750 kilometre journey from the state capital via Roma and Injune. Carnarvon Gorge is a small section of Carnarvon National Park which totals 298,000 hectares. This long narrow section we're heading towards is part of the Great Dividing Range known as the Ranch. Rain falling on this side flows to the Pacific Ocean, while on the other side it makes the long journey south, eventually running into the mighty Murray-Darling system. The ranch got its name from the cattle-duffing habits of Harry Redford, or Captain Starlight as is better known. Just look at the country down there, and imagine what kind of rugged individuals these blokes were to be driving cattle through such a place. Up ahead lies the unmistakable bulk of Battleship Spur, one of the high country's most prominent features. But to see it like this is cheating. Later, we'll do it the hard way, on foot. The gorge snakes its way west for another 20 kilometres, so we're only about a third of the way. But we'll swing around now and return via the northern side, bordered by the Consuelo Tableland, and we'll get a close look at the Devil's Signpost and Clematis Ridge as well. Just inside the park boundary is the entrance to Mickey's Creek at the base of the ranch, and it's a great place to begin our tour of the gorge on the ground. Well, this is Mickey's Creek, just outside of Carnarvon Gorge. It's the easiest side gorge to access, being just a short distance from the road, but you can see it as a microcosm of the main gorge, with its own side gorges, areas of remnant rainforest, and just like Carnarvon Creek, it's spring-fed and flows for about a third of the way above ground. You can picture this as your entree, with Carnarvon Gorge as your main. Here where Warumba Gorge joins Mickey's Creek Gorge, the sandstone cliffs tower about 150 metres overhead. Now Mickey's Creek Gorge continues for quite a few kilometres up towards the ranch, and it's definitely worth exploring. But today, for a bit of an adventure, we're going to wander up Warumba Gorge as far as we can. Warumba is one of my favourite side gorges. I love its sinuous serpentine nature, the colours of the moss and the smooth contours of the mollyamber stone near its base. You do have to get your feet wet occasionally to make it to the end, but there is something irresistible about exploring the nooks and the crannies that Carnarvon has to offer. You really could spend a lifetime here and still feel like there was more waiting to be discovered. That's part of Carnarvon's attraction. Well, I think that might do it. It's getting pretty chilly in here and I don't think we can get out of this one. So we might make a beeline back to the car park and some sunshine. Okay, well here we are at the start of the main gorge, and it's also the start of the main walking track. But before we get settled in here at the campgrounds, I thought we'd take a bit of a look around just to get a feel for the place. And besides, I'd like you to meet a friend of mine, someone who's going to be our constant travelling companion over the next few days. And here she is, Carnarvon Creek. Now at the moment we're at crossing 1 and there are 22 creek crossings between here and the Big Bend campgrounds further upstream. Since the Europeans came to the area, Carnarvon Creek has only run dry twice, back in 1902 and 1931, which gives you some idea just how reliable the water source is and how important it is to the local ecosystem. Just like each of the side gorges, the creek crossings have their own character, and it's worth stopping in the middle and looking up and downstream. Creek appreciation you might call it, because around here you never know what you might find. This walk always lets me know I'm back in the gorge again. The sound of the creek, the calls of the currawongs reverberating off the cliffs, and Bulimba Bluff standing high above the campground. Speaking of campground, I guess we'd better head back and find out which campsite we've booked.
They're probably pushing it. I don't think we can really justify it. We'd love to take you out. Actually, we were going to ask Tom about it. Like, you know, just to let you know.
Well, there's nothing better than at the end of a long day, sitting around a campfire, telling stories and staring into the embers. The campgrounds here can get pretty chilly during winter, regularly approaching the 0 mark. But during the day, the temperatures hover around 20, which is absolutely perfect for walking. And that's what we're up to tomorrow. From the campground, it's around 3.5 kilometres walk up the gorge to the first site, so it's good to get an early start. Now, the Moss Gardens is considered one of the most picturesque spots in the entire park. But just as a teaser, we're going to take a short trip into Hellhole Gorge. Okay, now this is what I wanted to show you. What does this remind you of? Yeah, rainforest, and probably the last thing you expect to find hundreds of kilometres inland from the coast. But pockets of this remnant rainforest exist throughout the whole gorge, and they literally are remnants of forests which once clothed all of Australia, back when times were a little wetter. Then as the climate changed and things got drier, these forests then contracted to the coast and to the areas of high rainfall. But here in the gorge, these forests have managed to survive because of the protection afforded by the cliffs and also the reliable water source, which is literally seeping out of the rocks around us. Here in the forest, it's like looking into a window to the past, back into the time when this sort of vegetation dominated all of Australia. And that's even before the eucalypts took over. It's incredible stuff, but this next one will really blow you away. The Moss Gardens is a magical place, and it is so characteristic of Carnarvon Gorge. You've got this incredibly lush green wall of moss, a waterfall capped with tree ferns, and all about us sheer sandstone cliffs. And what's behind the waterfall? I have no idea, and I guess that adds to the mystique of the place. The gorge lets you in on some of the secrets, but you become very aware that there's a lot still hidden waiting to be explored. Well, you've probably figured out that the wall of moss is here because of the water seeping through the rocks all around us. But where has the water come from and why here? Well, about 10,000 years ago, the water fell as rain up on the high country above us. And since then it has slowly worked its way down through the sandstone. But here at this level, it's hit an obstacle. The dark layer of rock you can see behind me is known as molly amber shale, and it's completely impermeable to water. And so when the water hits this, it can go no further and is forced out sideways to seep through the rocks here. With this side gorge receiving only dappled sunlight, the combinations of light and water combine to create the perfect microclimate for rainforest species, and in particular the mosses. This pattern is repeated many times throughout the gorge, and it all contributes to the flow of Carnarvon Creek. The sandstone above us is acting like a giant sponge that's soaking up all the rainfall. But not all of the water makes it out through places like this, and some of it goes further down to become water of the Great Artesian Basin below us.
Our next destination, the amphitheatre, didn't become well known until the 60s, and it's easy to understand why.
No, it's not the amphitheatre, it's only the entrance. The amphitheatre is up there through the cleft, but I like to sit down here and wait so I can have it all to myself. It's such an awesome place, I don't like to share it with anyone. Standing here, you have to wonder how this huge cavity formed. Originally it was all solid sandstone, and where we stand now lies on the intersection of 4 major fault lines. Our old friend water worked its way down those weaknesses, carving out a huge block, and then eroded it, grain by grain, out that narrow exit. Now the amphitheatre is one of those places you just have to experience for yourself. It can humble and inspire you at the same time, and unfortunately it's near impossible to capture on film. The place has great acoustics too, and you'll often hear cooeys floating high above the cliff lines as you approach. And that's another reason why I like to have the place to myself, so I don't get too embarrassed. Well, we're just about to head in towards Canyon, but I thought we'd stop here for a little bit of smoko first. Just have a look at the vegetation around here, isn't it lush? This small area of the gorge is crisscrossed with major fault lines, and where that permeable, impermeable layer is exposed, there are springs all over the shop, and the rainforest species are making most of all that available water. But up there in Ward's Canyon, something very different is happening. These are king ferns, Angiopteris evecta. Now that's quite a mouthful, but these are the largest ferns in the world, with fronds up to 5 metres long, and they're considered living fossils, having remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. Now, king ferns have only been found in a few other locations, and all of them are coastal. Fraser Island, Mooloolah on the Sunshine Coast, and up in the Daintree. Now here in central Queensland, with all its gorges and its side gorges, Wards Canyon is the only area where they've been found, and there's only 13 of them. 30 metres up the creek here, we'll get some clues as to why they're here. Behind me is Aljon Falls, a permanent supply of water, which is seeping from a series of springs located just above us. The king ferns need this permanent water because it's water pressure which is holding up their huge fronds. Secondly, this canyon is quite narrow, receiving only dappled sunlight, which is vital for the king ferns. And lastly, being such a small catchment, the ferns are saved from the damage of large volumes of floodwater. And so here in Wards Canyon, the king ferns have ideal conditions to grow and survive, something they've done in this spot for millions of years.
Wards Canyon is named after the Ward brothers, two marsupial hunters who used the canyon early in the 1900s because of its cool, secluded nature and the well-hidden entrance. Why did they want somewhere hidden? Well, it seems that the Ward brothers stored furs caught illegally in the close season here, in the cool recesses of the freezing chamber, until the season officially opened and they could sell them without risk. Now the place is home to the little bentwing and the sheath-tailed bats, and the elusive tusked frog you can hear calling from the pools. Around midday, a sliver of light passes through the chamber, illuminating Aljon Falls, often disturbing the bats and making for a challenging photo opportunity.
The art gallery. It's 62 metres long, has around 600 stencils and 1,343 individual engravings. It's believed that the gorge was used by as many as 3 different language groups, although never on a permanent basis, and the art gallery here was first used around 3,500 years ago. It's also interesting to note that the 3 major art sites in the park all have similar aspects that make the most of the winter sun and also have ready access to the high country.
Carnarvon Gorge is renowned for its rock art, and in particular its stencil art, a style which predominates here at the art gallery. Studies indicate that the vast majority of traditional Aboriginal art had spiritual significance, and that the ritual of producing the art was at least as important as the end result. For example, take one of the numerous hand stencils. Rather than seeing it as an outline of a hand, think of it as a representation of an individual's timeless connection to his land and his people, a bonding symbolised as much by the act of stenciling as by the finished work itself. It's hard to comprehend just how intricately bound the Aboriginals felt to their land and their fellow people. Unfortunately, much of the traditional Aboriginal knowledge about the art in Carnarvon Gorge remains unknown. Nonetheless, it is an impressive place that often leaves you with more questions than answers.
End of another great day at Carnarvon. You know, we'll only see a tiny part of the national park, it's huge. And when you start to get away from the people, you get a bit of a feel for what the local explorers went through. I mean, it's beautiful country, but gee, it's rugged, especially up through the gorges. It's so easy to get lost, and that's with a map. It made for perfect country for folks like Captain Starlight to hide all his cattle. You know, Captain Starlight once drove a mob of stolen cattle from Longreach down to Adelaide. What an epic feat. And of course, as far as history goes, preceding any of the Europeans in the area were the Aborigines.
There's one spot up there near Mount Moffat where the Kenneth boys used to hide out, called Kenneth's Cave. And it was found that the Aborigines first used it 19,500 years ago. Here in the gorge, Cathedral Cave was excavated and they found large volumes of macrosomia nutshells. Now, these nuts in their natural state are highly toxic, but the Aborigines had some way of preparing them so that they could be safely eaten. That's just another way that the Aborigines had of utilising their natural resources. Well, personally, I'm thankful for my packet pasta and my tent. So I might hit the sack because we've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow.
Well, this is the Blimba Bluff track, but at 3:30 in the morning you've got to be wondering what I'm doing here. Well, the truth is I'm off to see the sunrise from the best possible vantage point the gorge has to offer. There's a small hitch in my plan, however, 936 stairs to the top, but seeing the sun come up over the gorge is always worth the effort. So come on, let's go.
Always worth the climb and the lack of sleep. Standing up here on Blimba Bluff, we're 600 metres above sea level and 200 metres above the campgrounds down below us. Behind me, the cliff line you can see is over 1 kilometre away, and above that rises the ranch, which is another 400 metres above this level here. The range runs out to the west to the famous Battleship Spur, which is a mecca for the bushwalkers, being 1,074 metres above sea level. Blimba Bluff gives most visitors their only chance to see the landscape on top of the shelves above the cliff line, and it's markedly different as well. You won't find any remnant rainforest up here. The track up to the bluff passed through some fairly distinctive vegetation zones, and now there's a bit more light. We might check it out on the way back through, after I finish my cuppa, of course. Now this fella's known as the budgeroo, and generally you'll only find it up here in the drier shelf country. Now it must have had some special significance to the local Aborigines, because it often used the bark of this tree to make their burial cylinders. If you're interested in plants, then the walk to Blimba Bluff gives you the best chance to see the biggest range of them, probably in any of the walks in the park. Just here in this small gully you've got cabbage tree palms, which are here for the water, the huge turpentine trees, spotted gums, and a whole variety of orchids and lilies. In fact, if you know your plants on the way up to the bluff, then you've pretty well got the plants of the gorge summed up. You know, it's really easy to miss some things as you're walking around looking up at the trees, but if you're observant, you'll see some pretty interesting stuff. The cocky has been feeding the casuarina tree above me, and they're one of the few birds which can get through the casuarina cones. It's a tough nut to crack. Now there's an old bushie's tale that if you see a black cockatoo, it means it's going to rain. Well, there's a bit of science behind that. Apparently when it's just about to rain, the casuarina cones soften up with the moisture, and the black cockies know it and come for it because they love it. Doesn't look that far from here, does it? Oh, well, the trip back down is easy, and we're back in time for a late breakfast.
If you'll excuse the pun, Carnarvon is simply gorgeous. What a place to call a temporary home, right next to the creek amongst the cabbage palms and the macrosamias. And the wildlife. Eastern grey kangaroos, kookaburras, currawongs, apostle birds, and even the odd lace monitor all wander around freely. In fact, there's so much wildlife here that they can get a bit out of hand. It's a common situation. People enjoy feeding the animals, and it creates a few problems. The animals can wind up becoming sick from an unnatural diet, and can become cheeky and aggressive as they compete for food. The currawongs in the campgrounds are a classic example, and are more than able to help themselves, even if not fed intentionally. But with a little care, it's possible to enjoy their company without upsetting things too much.
Well, Ian has retired down to the bar for a few beers to recover from his earlier exploits, so I'll be your guide this evening for a spot of nocturnal wildlife watching. Late afternoon in the gorge is just magical, and we're going to head out to watch the changing of the guard. As the shadows creep up the bluff, the night shift of the animal world begins to emerge, and tonight we're going to try and sneak up on a few of them with our spotlight. But first, let's wander down the nature trail and see if we can find some platypus. Well, platypus can be seen at any time of the day, but they're most active at dawn and dusk. And here along the nature trail there are some great little lookouts over the creek. Now, one thing to remember when platypus watching is that they're very sensitive to their surroundings. So any sudden noise or movement on our part can send them back to their burrows. Platypus, along with echidna, are monotremes or egg-laying mammals. They can remain submerged for up to 10 minutes as they forage along the creek bed for shrimps and mollusks. Their bills are lined with highly sensitive receptors that can pick up any movements and trace the tiny electrical impulses emitted by their prey. Then they store their catch in cheek pouches to be chewed up and swallowed at the surface. Carnarvon Creek has a healthy population of platypus, and it's got a reputation as a place where you can get a good look at them. But another thing to remember is that platypus live and breed in burrows that extend quite a distance back under the creek bank. So staying on the tracks and at the designated lookouts will avoid the risk of collapsing their burrows. Well, they don't call them elusive for nothing, so maybe we'll have better luck in the morning.
The ecosystem here revolves around the creek, which is itself teeming with life. Below the surface, eels, catfish and perch can be seen lazily cruising the pools. Above, water birds abound. Dusky moorhens, several species of duck, cormorants and herons are regularly seen. Another benefit of wildlife watching at Carnarvon is the fact that a lot of the wildlife is used to being watched. Take this show pony for instance. Elsewhere, eastern water dragons disappear underwater at the first sign of approach. Make no mistake though, these animals are wild and should be respected as such. The largest creatures you're likely to encounter are the macropods. The eastern greys come down to the water to drink in the afternoon, and if you're quiet, you may encounter the secretive swamp wallaby or the aptly named pretty face. A rustling in the blady grass will often reveal something unexpected. Echidnas, which are actually quite closely related to platypus, may be seen day or night hunting for ants and termites along Carnarvon's tracks. Most of Australia's mammals are nocturnal and therefore best viewed at night, but they do leave clues as to their whereabouts that you can encounter during the day. The marks on this spotted gum are glider feed marks, recent ones at that, meaning that this will be a good spot to check tonight.
All right, well, the platypus might have outsmarted us this afternoon, but with this, the rest of them don't stand a chance. In fact, we've already heard some owls and some gliders calling tonight, so let's go and see if we can spot a few. Ah, now there's a pair of eyes.
The call of the southern boobock owl, a signature nocturnal sound of the Australian bush, can be heard throughout the night. The southern boobock is one of 3 hawk owls to frequent the gorge. Hawk owls lack the classic facial discs so characteristic of other owls, but hunt with equal stealth and skill. A lot of the other animals seen while spotlighting are all potential prey for their silent wings and powerful talons. Amazing as it may seem, this yellow-bellied glider is no exception and has to be wary of owls, particularly around the full moon, which increases the predator's vision. This little fellow has come back to check out the feed tree we saw earlier. Gliders are similar to possums, except they have a membrane between their front and back legs that enables them to glide from tree to tree as they forage. They are difficult to see when spotlighting as they constantly dart amongst the forest canopy, but if you watch for eye shine high in the trees, occasionally you'll spot them. Of course, not all night creatures are found in the trees. Many of Carnarvon's nocturnal inhabitants spend their time elsewhere. In fact, if you're not wary, you might miss some real beauties.
Okay, well, so far we've seen quite a bit, and really that's just a taste of what's actually creeping around here after dark. But I think it's time to call it a night because we've got to get up early to catch those platypus again. My turn for an early morning, it seems. With a bit of luck, we'll catch our elusive aquatic friends and get a good start to the day's sightseeing. There you go, our patience has been rewarded. They're a bizarre-looking creature. It's no wonder they caused such a stir when the first specimen was sent back to Europe. Apparently it was initially ridiculed as a hoax, but in this case the truth really was stranger than any fiction. An egg-laying mammal with a bill like a duck, webbed feet with venomous spurs, and a tail like a beaver. Truly amazing. I can sit and watch them for hours, but they seldom hang around for that long. Well, another early start rewarded in true Carnarvon fashion. Ian's going to be in the upper gorge today, and in fact, he's more than likely already on the trail, so let's see what he's up to.
Morning all. Well, I hope we're well rested because we've got some ground to cover today. Our first stop will be Carnarvon Gorge, and it's about 8 k's up from the information centre. Then we'll wander up to Cathedral Cave, which is another Aboriginal art and occupation site. And then if that's not enough, we'll head into Bawinda Gorge and climb out and up onto Battleship Spur, where we'll see the sunset over the highlands. So let's get cracking. The entrance to Carnarvon Gorge is bordered by this great chunk of sandstone, like a sentinel watching over you as you pass through. It's pretty rugged going at the moment as it's quite overgrown, but we shouldn't have too much trouble getting in. Once we've passed the casuarinas, we'll be okay. You've probably seen this shot before, and rightly so. It makes a great photo. Fantastic perspective. But let's see if we can find some equally impressive sights a little further up. Well, by now you should be getting a pretty good feel for the place. We've seen most of the attractions in the main gorge and a few of the less visited ones, like this one. Okay, so it's all gorge country, and they're similar in that respect, but all the side gorges have their own character. You could spend a day in this one alone, and before long they become like old friends. When you're out on the tracks, it's easy to focus only on your destination. But if you keep your head down and power along, then all you'll see is the dirt go by, and you'll miss a lot of what the gorge can offer. For instance, when you're out on the track this early, you'll be amazed by the abundance of bird life. There are over 180 species here to keep the birdwatchers interested. And if you have trouble telling the white-throated warbler from the yellow-tufted honeyeater, you'll still appreciate the chorus of calls and the flashes of flying colour. Past the art gallery, the track is a lot less travelled, and it narrows quite a bit. The gorge walls seem to follow suit and close in on around you. In fact, sometimes it's quite tricky to work out exactly which way you're facing. It's a completely different feel up here, so let's keep going and see a bit more of it. Well, that's a fair morning's walk. It feels good to get that pack off finally, but it's worth every drop of sweat. Have a look at this place. Cathedral Cave in all its grandeur. Now this site was first excavated back in 1975 by a guy called Dr. Beaton, who found through carbon dating that the cave was first occupied 3,560 years ago. Now a lot of the motifs here are similar to those at the art gallery with a few exceptions, but the one that I find most interesting are these stencils of chikara pendants. For many years researchers were puzzled as to what they were, until they happened upon an early photograph that identified them as pendants made from the Mila shell. The Milo shell is a bivalve that lives in tropical waters, and it's likely that such items were traded all the way down from the Gulf, from tribe to tribe, in successively smaller pieces. The stencil art of the Central Queensland Sandstone Belt is recognised as being the most complex in the world. These net-like images are made up of a series of individual stencils, arranged as part of an overall larger design. Nowhere else was this composite stenciling developed to such an extent. These guys were the best in the business. Now you've seen both the major art sites in the gorge, and you can understand what immense cultural value these sites had to the Aborigines then, and have to all Australians now.
Now remember what I said about the art sites being located near access points to the high country? Well, our next step is to explore one of those routes.
Just around the corner from Cathedral Cave is Carnarvon Gorge. It's a narrow, beautifully sculptured side gorge, indicating that large volumes of water come down here in summer, scouring the floors and smoothing all the rough edges from the walls. Again, we'll see little vegetation growing on the gorge floor, except in areas protected from the full brunt of the passing water.
Carnarvon Gorge is pretty spectacular, isn't it? Well, we're now 1.5 kilometres up it, and we've come to the turn-off to Battleship Spur, which is a steep gully up behind me. It used to be pretty easy to miss the turn-off, but each year people have added a few new rock cans, making it pretty obvious now. Well, we better get cracking because we've got quite a walk ahead of us. After we climb out of this gorge, we have to scramble across the shelf country, then right up onto the Great Dividing Range. Oh, and if you are ever up this way, remember to book a site. There's nothing worse than getting all the way to the top to find that campsites are full and you have to come back down again. Now this is an interesting spot. Coming up from the floor of the gorge is the first place we get a close-up view of the area's volcanic history. This is a scree slope, basically a whole pile of eroded basalt, which has either crumbled from the volcanic cap above us or from one of the vents which spewed lava all over the place. It's also serious ankle-busting territory. Well, that's pretty tough going. It's taken about 2.5 hours to complete the climb, but here we are on top of the Great Dividing Range, and it is all worthwhile. Now it's just a short walk across to the spur, so I'll see you there. Have a look at that. Up here on Battleship Spur, we're now 600 metres above the creek, with Carnarvon Gorge snagging its way out to the east.
200 million years of geological history laid out below. Throughout that time, this place has sunk to become an inland sea, then filled up with hundreds of metres of sand, been uplifted, and then finally covered with lava. And after all that, it's only taken the last 27 million years for the creek to erode its way down through all those layers, leaving behind the majestic views we see today. Well, that's home for tonight. Now it's time to settle in and enjoy that sunset. You know, I can't think of another place I'd rather be right now. Oh, except maybe down at the campground so I didn't have to walk back. But it's all downhill from here, so after brekkie, we'll hit the track. Well, this sure is a welcoming sight after coming down from Battleship Spur. It's known as the Big Bend and it's located on this nice tight turn in Carnarvon Creek. It's also a good spot if you want to get away from the crowds down at the main campgrounds. And if you're into a bit of exploring, then it's a great base so you can search the upper reaches here. Well, I reckon I'm going to take a break here, but Annie's going to take you on a trek up to the Devil's Signpost. Another good climb, but a piece of cake once you've mastered Battleship Spur.
Well, we're on the Minna Ridge track to Devil's Signpost and it's a great hike with some awesome views. But it's not quite the piece of cake that Ian made out. There are some steeper sections, but it's well worth the climb. And it's classed as a remote walk, so you will need to check with the rangers at the information centre before you set out. Now, the Devil's Signpost is actually a chunk of the precipice sandstone that has been cut off from the main cliffs, left behind as the escarpment retreated. Well, we're almost there, so let's go and check it out. Away to the southeast run the sandstone cliff lines bordering the Mollyamba section of the park. Beyond them lies Mollyamba Gorge itself, an impressive system, although it lacks the grandeur of the high country that flanks us here. Mollyamba is best seen from the air and has some fantastic looking spires and dissected gorges. There sure is some amazing country around here.
Well, I guess that about wraps up the tour, folks. As Carnarvon Wilderness Guides, we'd like to thank you for your company. And we sure hope that you've enjoyed Carnarvon Gorge as much as we do.
There's so much to explore, so if you'd ever like to see the park with us, all you have to do is let us know. Safe travels!